Hi, I'm Ben Harrison, the founder of EdTech Games, and this video is going to walk you through our fractions program. So there are two key research findings that you'll want to know about. First of all, as we assess thousands and thousands of students across the country, if you look at these red bars, we found that students never really master more than about 60% of the basic third grade foundational fraction standards. So it obviously varies from student to student, but in general, the students never stop struggling with foundational standards like equivalent fractions, whole number fractions, or the actual meaning of a denominator. Now, the really exciting news here is that we found our program is able to completely solve that problem. So the light blue bar in the middle shows that after just 2 or 3 hours, we're typically increasing student mastery by about 20% of an entire grade's worth of content. And when they finish, which typically only takes about 5 hours, they have complete mastery. Now, I get that those results sound like marketing hype and they sound a bit self-serving, but this is such a game changer for fractions that I hope you'll stick with me for just a little bit so you can see how valid our assessments are and that we really are this effective. Okay, before we jump into the game though, let's dig into these averages just a little bit because beneath them is a huge amount of disparity. So in this graph, every single bar is a unique student and the light blue bars at the bottom are their pre-test scores. So the average here is around 50%, but the levels of mastery are absolutely all over the place. And this is roughly what 4th and 5th grade teachers are inheriting every year. We know that their mastery can improve in 4th and 5th grade by 5 to 10% as they keep reviewing, but that's about it. So without a highly individualized, incredibly rigorous intervention, most students are only ever going to get to about 60% mastery of the basic 3rd grade fraction concepts. Okay, so let's dig into how we assess these things and how do we teach these standards so effectively to students. Okay, now let's jump into the game and show you how all this actually happens. So here we're on the link edtechgames.com/fractions. Okay, that's our teacher tour link, and you can go to that if you want to walk someone through the same thing that we're about to walk through. Okay, I'm going to pop this button here to go full screen, and you can see we're on the teacher tour option. If you want to see exactly what a student's seeing, you can click the student demo thing. On the teacher tour, we are going to skip the intro. The students walk through to teach them about gameplay and how to walk and things like that, because we're going to be as efficient with your time as we can possibly be. So we just hit the go button. We put a little warning here saying, hey, you're not logged in, because we had some students playing this by accident rather than their own saved game, so it wasn't saving their progress. So the game will go through, and the first time it plays each level, it will have to cache that content. So the first time it might not load quite as quickly because it has to download, but then it will cache that and load very quickly the next time. The game is obviously built for very high-end systems. If you have a spectacular computer at your school or a lab with better computers, it's definitely worth the effort for that. But it will also automatically optimize down to the worst Chromebook that we've been able to find on the planet. And then we just jump right into the pretest. I mean, we start really hard and rigorously with the math. The gameplay in our system is integrated into the learning. They are one and the same. So we don't do a little bit of learning here and then go have some fun. It's all completely integrated, so we're never wasting any time. The learning is part of the gameplay. So because this is the teacher tour, we want to introduce that you can click this green skip question button if you want to, because we want you thinking about why you're being asked certain questions, not what the answer is. You can jump around to various sections of the pretest using this navigation bar down here as well. So right off the bat, we want to make sure the students understand how to use this thing. If they click, some students can't read super good, right? So if they click this button in the top left of this corner of the screen, it will read the question to them. And then if they are native in a different language and they're struggling with English, they can press this question and they can switch the whole thing to a different language. Then they can go back and read it to themselves in that different language. So it's very helpful for them. Next, we have to make sure they understand how to use the tools. So you slide this to partition and then you click or tap to select different piece. That's how you partition and select when we go through and using fraction strips. And then some kids might be on a tablet and make sure that they know how to use the digital keypad here to enter in numbers that they might need to or not. And then once they know how to answer some questions, we jump right into it, okay? So this is where all of that pretest data comes from that we were talking about earlier. These are the exact questions that the students are able to get correctly or not. So this first question is fascinating because in a sense, it's the easiest conceptual question here, but a lot of kids miss it because it is conceptual. You can see here with these, we got a fraction strip in 5 pieces. If I highlighted one of those, I think most students could get it correct, but because it's just conceptual, what does a unit fraction mean? A lot of kids actually miss this one as they go through. Next, you can see this question here is asking, can you recognize a fraction strip that's already created for you? Okay, that's one level of mastery there. This one, these standards are intrinsic in both TEKS and Common Core. It doesn't specifically talk about this mastery, but we found that they have to understand the concept of the denominator and the numerator. And most students don't. They're trying to remember which one's on top and which one's on bottom, but they don't really have a clear understanding of what they actually mean. It's one of the biggest holdups that we found for their rapid mastery of future concepts. So we want to see if they have that. Now here, can you create a fraction all on your own from scratch? Not just, can you recognize one that's shown to you, but can you do one yourself from scratch? Now we start getting into some problem solving. This one we took straight from a pretty common end of grade test. And here it's not really adding, it's more of a counting piece. But he got it 1/5 on a few different days. Are they able to get that piece correctly? Are they able to compare the visualizations of these pieces? And then this one's interesting because, again, we stole this one straight from an end of grade test, basically, because a lot of this difficulty here is in the vocabulary. Lonnie and his 3 friends win 8 pieces of candy and share them equally. It's the Lonnie and part. It means it's not 3 friends. You got to add in that you got to include Lonnie in with those 3 friends. So definitely some challenging story problems as we go through these different examples. Then we start moving into number lines. The functionality for this is the same as the fraction strip. We make sure they note that you slide and click to select. Very similar there. And then we can jump into it. So it's a very similar conceptually to that very first question, but can you understand the concept when it applies to a fraction strip? To a number line, excuse me. And then can you click to place something correctly on the number line? And then can you model it from scratch yourself? Can you partition this thing and find the right thing to click on as you go through? And now the next question we move into, the student will need access to their own modeling tools. Okay, we want to make sure that they're able to model things themselves. And so we introduce them to this toolkit and we then teach them how to use it. They're able to come in and create their own fraction strips. They can use a chocolate bar if they want to. They can partition it, select it. They can make a second one to do comparisons with. They can increase the number of holes on there. They can still partition it. They can select different amounts. They can clear them out. They can also add a number line. On some devices, this can be a little small, so they can increase or decrease the size of this. They still slide to partition. They click to select. They can clean the whole thing out. They can move the whole thing around. They can shrink it down and put it back out of the way, okay? So they got that tool to help them answer some of these questions that are coming up right now. So equivalent fractions. Are you able to model an equivalent fraction right off the bat? Okay, we're testing that piece, that slice of that standard. Well, can you do it just mathematically? If I just give you 1/4, can you kind of come up with a basic equivalent fraction on your own? Then can you model it to kind of convey that you got some of that conceptual understanding that you need to have? This is representing whole numbers as fractions. This one's interesting. In Texas, this isn't specifically in the 3rd grade TEKS, but it's required for the 4th grade content. So it's a little bit in no man's land, but we found this is easily one of the most important concepts that I learned because it really ties together the conceptual understanding of all the different concepts. So we found this is a really critical piece for students to have in order to help them really master everything and retain that mastery long term. And then we jump into just comparing fractions. In a simple comparison, they got a 33% chance of getting it correct, even if they just guess. So we put a few on here to try and understand if they really have this understood correctly or not. Then we hit them with a story problem to make sure they can apply it in a problem-solving context as well. Okay, and now if you're a third grader, then at this point, depending on what your standards are, it would just move you on to start learning and mastering any concepts that you didn't have down completely. Now, if you're a fourth grader or if you're an advanced third grade and your teacher lets you move on, then you can go ahead and it would move you on automatically as soon as you're ready. It would move you on automatically to start learning the fourth grade concepts. Okay, now we'll go ahead and show you what some of the fourth grade content looks like. So as we hit fourth grade, we need more robust tools for solving the questions they're going to face. So we want to make sure they understand how to use those tools so they can effectively address the assessment questions they're about to hit. So we still have our fraction strip, but now we're showing them that you can click things a second time to change its color to convey adding, or subtract it again to change it to red to imply subtracting. On the number line, we get a little more clarity with it, where it wants me to partition into eighths, and then we get this little green arrow that we can drag to represent addition, or we can drag it the other way to represent subtraction. We can clear pieces out. We can add a little more complex number line fraction strip combo here, where we can drag little unit fraction pieces to the number line now, and then we can drag them on, we can drag them off, and we can click them to represent subtracting them as well as adding things up there. So just some more tools for them to help solve some of these questions that they're about to face in just a minute. So we want to assess their numerical skills. Can you just handle things math-wise? Conceptually, can you kind of understand what a visual representation of those same or similar math questions might be? And answering these correctly while talking starts to get really hard. Then we also cover subtraction. Again, now the visualization of the subtraction. You can see here that we've got a spot 11/12, and we've subtracted something from there. We want to make sure, this isn't multiple choice. We're to the absolute degree possible, we're letting them really process it at a granular level so that they can really see if they really understand the concepts and can do the mathematical side of it as well. All right. Here we get some more addition, but we also get some benchmark fraction comparison using addition and subtraction. So we're really trying to see how comfortable they are with using these different tools in combination. Decomposing is nice because we give them the tools to actually let them decompose it. Again, it's not just to fill in the blank. It doesn't come pre-decomposed and they're just filling in the pieces. They're able to, as much as possible, we're giving them an opportunity to really generate the answers themselves from scratch to the degree that we possibly can. We're making sure they can decompose it into completely different things. Like I couldn't just do 4/12 and 3/4 again here. It wants to make sure they can just use some diversity and get different ways to break these things up. Another piece we've got here. Then we just lots of story problems. We want to make sure they can really just solve problems. You take these, have the conceptual understanding, be able to do the math, then also be able to apply that to real world problems and be able to put it all together. Okay, and I'm going to kind of skip through these. They're really cool problems. They're just the right balance to where you make sure they really understand the concepts as they go through to be effective. And now that it knows what they need to work on, it's going to send them out to work on just the right things. Okay, so now we'll jump in and start walking you through some of the lessons so you can get a real feel for how it is we're able to generate mastery so effectively. And this is the teacher tour, so it's not going to actually be related to which questions we missed or didn't miss during the pretest. When the student comes in, it'll figure out exactly which standards that they need to work on and target those specifically. But for here, we're just going to walk you through some random lessons just to get you a feel for it. Okay, so this is one of the basic examples of a lesson. A student doesn't really know very much about fractions at all. He can come in here and we can just build him from the ground up to help make sure he masters everything. So notice we don't just have like some multiple choice questions or a couple of questions. We take each thing we're trying to ask, and we break it down into these granular examples. So in this case, the fraction strip has how many equal parts. You know, it's a slightly challenging step for each student to make, but it's a step that they can all make as they go through this. And the next one, so each one is 1/3 of the whole. Very easy steps as they come along here. They can be a little bit challenging. We want to make sure that each individual step is very doable. And these are all very simple ones, but for a student that's just barely starting out, this is just the right place for him to begin. Now, we skipped all the gameplay because this is the teacher tour, but here it's explaining to the student that they're trying to collect this branium, and it's saying you just filled one energy tank by passing off that whole whiteboard. They need to fill up the rest of these tanks in order to pass off this particular level. And you can tell that this character, it's the most basic kind of boring character you can possibly have. That's because that's what they start with, and then as they learn and progress and become smarter and smarter, their avatar will evolve to reflect the things they've been learning, the mastery they're achieving. They'll also unlock new worlds and things. As we come to the next question, in this student, it would be the same concepts that we just went through, but the degree of difficulty is going to increase a little bit. So that not only do we want to make sure they understand the concept in a simple form, we want to make sure they understand it at the maximum difficulty that the standards require out of them. So once we make sure that we're confident that they know that standard particularly well, then we'll move on to something else. So for the teachers now, we're going to jump to a completely different lesson. I think we're jumping up to lesson 5. One thing that it's explaining here, it wants you to know as a teacher, you're going to have lots of really nice reports that show you clear data, but as you're just walking around the classroom, the kids are working on Chromebooks, there's some, it just wants to explain to you here how you can see where they're at quickly in that setting. So the 1 here means they're in Unit 1. You got these 7 medallions, these archstones in this case, and the blue ones mean they've passed it off. So, you know, in this sense, he would have passed off 4 lessons. He's on lesson 5, and these 2 in red means that he still has a couple of lessons to go after he finishes this one. Okay, so it's just walking you through that part there. And so now we're going to jump to just a completely different lesson so you can get a feel for how we handle the different standards we might run into. Okay, so in this lesson here, we're kind of transitioning from fraction strips to number lines. So we have the number line here, but we also have a bunch of our fraction piece manipulatives here, and we can drag those guys up. And what it's wanting us to do here is just basically fill this entire number line with sixths. And so we can visualize, we want to start them to help them really understand how the fraction strips and the number lines all connect together. So we let them build it. And in this example, we found one of the key sticking points for students when they try and make this transition is why are all of these fraction pieces up here 1/6, whereas the ones down below are counting up 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we really stop and dial in on that. So why is this first one here 0/6? We let them figure that out. And why is the next one 1/6? And then why is it 2/6 there? You know, what are all the denominators? And why are all the denominators the same? Then we let them go through and label each of the fraction pieces as they go along so they can really build that conceptual understanding. Then we go through and we start labeling the number line pieces so they can really get an understanding and a consciousness for why those are different. And then we pull away those fraction pieces so they can do it with just the number line and really get a concrete understanding of why the number line is what it is. Okay, so just a quick little example of that. All right, and let's jump into another one here. Okay, so now we're working on graphing 3/6 on a number line. Just a quick example here. How many equal parts are on the number line? Just make sure they've got the fundamentals down pretty well. If they miss it, it'll do some nifty things to go through and help them review it. Make sure that it'll stop and dig into it and say, hey, let's make sure that we've got this part understood clearly before we move on. So we just gave you a quick little example of that. And then we want to model 3/6 on the number line. We first use fraction pieces so they can visualize what that would be like. And then we dig into helping them really understand what it is they just created there. You know, there are 3 1/6 pieces. Each part is 1/6. And then let's go through and let's label the whole thing out again. I want to make sure they understand that concept really neatly. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit on this. And then we let them create the whole thing from scratch. So we kind of keep going through a similar process of really building up their conceptual understanding to get to the answer. We don't just want the answer. We want to make sure that they have all the pieces that lead up to that answer. And that's just an example of how we do it all the way through. So notice we didn't get any brainium for that one because we had to work on it because we kind of made some mistakes there. It wants to make sure we're completely successful with each concept before we move on. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip through this one because we just did that one pretty much. And now we're just going to jump to a different part. As they keep passing off different parts of the levels, it opens up new areas for them. That's part of the gameplay that they're working through there. Okay, so in this section, learning to identify equivalent fractions. This is a piece that a lot of students really never get the conceptual understanding of. They really struggle with this. And so we have some really solid pieces to work through this. We start off just partitioning into four equal parts. We walk them through it all. We're modeling 1/4. We're labeling it, making sure this part's kind of a review for them. But then we jump into this part. Okay, well now we're going to split this guy into 8 pieces. And then we're going to select an equivalent amount there. Okay, we can see how these guys are equivalent to each other. All right, well, let's label it. I mean, it's the same volume that we can get the correct labels in there. And now we have them jump over and see if they can kind of transfer that learning and understanding to the unselected piece there. We stop from it, let them practice. And now we're going to jump in and just let them keep taking bigger and bigger chunks of this thing until we make sure they've got the whole piece, the whole process understood pretty effectively. Notice it's not multiple choice. We're always letting them create the information from scratch as much as possible so we can make sure that they really have that understanding deeply embedded. Okay, lots of story problems. We want to make sure they can really take all the conceptual understanding and the math skills and apply them to solving problems. Okay, I'm trading Grunt 3/4 of my energy bar for an equivalent amount of his identical bar. What equivalent fraction could I trade? Now, we're having them answer the question mathematically kind of for us here. They can use their toolkit down there if they want to model it a little bit. Then in this case, now we're having them also model it. In other cases, we have them model it first and then answer it. Here we're checking to see if they can figure out how to model it all on their own right off the bat. That's just where this particular question and whiteboard happens to be. Okay, let's grab one more. Let's grab a few more examples here of solving story problems. No, this one is, okay, so now let's look at, this is a really helpful lesson. This is in Unit 2. What we found is a lot of students really struggle with genuinely understanding denominators. Okay, so let's just look at how we tackle that a little bit. A lot of this first part here is just a quick review, which is which, and that's the piece we often are working on. We're flipping it up or around a little bit to make sure that they can really understand which words mean what they're supposed to. Okay, and now we jump into, in this portion of the unit, we're looking at multiple wholes. Do they still know what a denominator means and a numerator means when there's more than one whole? We found that at the end of the 3rd grade level, that's a really key piece for them to understand, which is why we stop and dig into that just a little bit. Can they recognize the shaded numerator, and can they still tell what the denominator is? It's kind of a simple thing. Once you understand numerator and denominator, it's really easy. But if you don't have that conceptual understanding, this just completely stymies the kids, which is why we stop and just make sure that they're really comfortable with this piece. Then we jump to a number line, make sure that they can understand on a fraction strip and a number line. They can follow the numerators all the way through. We just give them quite a few different examples here so they can track down what this all is really all about. We let them label it. This particular piece right here is the thing that we found that most students never ever understand. Even a lot of educators and adults, we don't quite understand how to deal with fractions of wholes if it's greater than 1. All right, I mean, it's a Common Core standard. It's not specifically mentioned in the TEKS, but the 4th grade concepts require it. So it's a prerequisite for 4th. We found it's a piece that the students just have to have, but it really is difficult because it ties together a lot of different things. All right, and if I can get this, if I can keep my brain power split enough. Okay, so you get the idea there. Okay, I'll give you just another couple quick more examples of story problems here that we're letting students tackle. All right, now how do they learn to grapple with fractions of wholes when it's more than one whole. This is just one more example of how we tackle that. We'd really take it, from the ground up, make it a very granular approach. All right, well, we've got 3 wholes here, and we're going to partition this new set into thirds. Okay, so we can count how many third parts there are in 3 wholes. If I can count and talk at the same time. 3 wholes. So 3 wholes is equal to how many thirds? I mean, that's right there so they can count it out. We've got their the concrete examples, but then we're going to quickly transition to more abstract examples. So 3 is equal to how many thirds? They're able to make those nice connections there. Now we start flipping it back and forth, comparing the bottom fraction strips there with the top one. So the fraction 9/3 is equivalent to that whole number. Now they've got the visuals there that they can make those connections themselves, but each little step is just the right amount of difficulty. Now we pull away the concrete examples to see if they can handle it abstractly. The hint there is use your toolkit to model it. If you can't remember the visual, use your toolkit to model it as we make this transition from concrete to abstract concepts. And can you tie a number like 9/3? Now can you go backwards and tie that back into a whole number? I mean, again, just a simple example, just one of the ways that we tackle that particular standard going through. I'm gonna hit you with one more story problem example here, just because this is one of my favorites. Because when I was first working on this, I thought this was really challenging to figure out. Once you figure it out, it's really simple, but until then, it just seems kind of confusing. Brano and I have identical food boxes. He partitions his into 6 equal sections. He partitions his into 8 equal sections. They both filled 4 sections in their food boxes. So how do the two compare? Until you get that visualization in your head, it's really tough. And I'm sure the hint here is going to be model it, right? The answer to if a student's ever stuck in Unit 2, the only thing you should say to help them would be model it for me. Model it for me. If they're stuck in Unit 1, the question should be, okay, what's it asking? Those 2 questions should get the students through anything they need in Units 1 and 2. Okay, all right. And we keep jumping through and let them model the answer out and make sure they know how to do that. Okay, so that's a quick peek at how we handle some of the 3rd grade standards. Again, keep in mind, these are the 3rd grade basic foundational standards that students have to progress through the rest of their fractions, and they never get them. They do a little better in 4th grade, a little better in 5th grade, but some of these really key pieces, these are the things that students never really understand. So that's what we go through and make sure that they understand really, really well. Okay, so that's your summary of EdTech Fractions. Our goal is to create a program powerful enough to completely cure fractions for students so that every student can have complete mastery of fractions. So thank you for watching this, and I hope you can work with us to find a way to get in the hands of your students so they can all achieve complete mastery. All right, thank you very much. Bye.